Hello and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. And Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games is a group that is focused on everything about accessible gaming in mobile games. And through our interview series, we interview game developers as well as accessibility influencers. And today we have two game developers from Purple Jam Limited, creators of such titles as A Demise and Pitch Black Audio Pong. So today we have Harry Cooper and Connor Harrison. Guys, welcome to the interview series.
Thank you very much. Yeah, love to speak to you.
So I always like to just kind of start off the interview series with just giving each of you a little opportunity to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, and what led you into creating games.
Shall I go first, Connor, or do you want to go?
Oh, you go for it, mate. You go for it.
Yeah. So I got into game development via the spatial audio route, which is, I guess, is why a lot of our games, in fact, all of our games use that to some degree. Connor and I met while we were doing a music production course at University of Derby. And from there, we started studying ambisonic audio and also binaural audio. And without getting boring and technical, we thought, okay, how can we make this sort of spatial audio experience for people who don't have a room with 32 speakers surrounding them like they have at Derby University? And the answer to that was binaural. So I started experimenting in Unity, which is the game engine that we use. And then I'd heard that Connor had got an English writing degree. And I'm not much of a writer, and I wanted to have this narrative for the games that we're making. So I sort of asked him, and we started getting on, and then just grew from there, really. Is that about right, Connor?
Yeah, it sounds about right to me. Yeah, I heard I got an English degree somewhere along the way as well. We sort of joined forces and kind of got creating. I think we spent a lot of time, the preliminary kind of process being like, what do we actually want this to be? How should it manifest? Where should it take place? Doing all the narrative building in pubs in our university lunch breaks and stuff, which is proper sort of two uni students building something in a pub to begin with, which was exactly, which was obviously years and years ago now. But yeah, that sounds about right.
Was the focus, so you're learning all about audio design, but was the focus like immediately, let's do a game with audio design, as opposed to, whatever other pathways you can go down in that field?
Well, I suppose we're both from a musical background. So initially I was like, well, using Unity, how would you make music that you can explore using spatial audio? And then I thought, well, there needs to be some way of directing the listener so that they don't wander off in sort of any direction, or do you cater for that, or how does that sort of thing work? And once you got into directing the listener to go in a certain direction, then from there you're sort of getting something that looks like a gameplay mechanic, and then it's like, well, who does this work for? It's blind gamers and visually impaired gamers. And then, as I say, I spoke to Connor about it. If it's a game, then it'd be nice to have a narrative, and yeah, and then once you get into game design, it's just fascinating because it's a combination of many forms of media, plus you have the wild card of player interaction, and how does that work in combination with the other things we'd learned from sound design. And yeah, I think we just both fell in love with game design, really. And that's how we got
here. That's interesting too. It sounds like right from the beginning, so you have a background in audio design, so you kind of obviously want to do something in that, but it seems like you very early on were focused on specifically doing this type of project for the blind and visually impaired. That was early on the audience that you were targeting with these offerings.
Yeah, for sure. It made absolute sense. It was the first sort of demographic that we thought of, because we come from audio, and we're sort of used to kind of designing things with no visuals in mind, and as soon as we started thinking game, then you start thinking audience, then you start thinking, visually impaired community. It was just sort of an absolute no-brainer.
Now, from the coding standpoint, did one of you go and learn coding, or did you bring on a third party to help you with the actual coding aspect of creating a game?
Yeah, that's sort of my remit these days. Yeah, I learned programming to make the games that we've made essentially, and now I do as much of that, or if not more than that, than I do with the actual audio side of things. And it's been a skill I've really enjoyed learning, and yeah, plan to sort of make it the rest of my career really. I still love doing audio design, but Connor's got great ears, and also Jordan Barry's not so involved these days, but he did a lot of the early sound design for the other games, and he's another university friend. Yeah, so I handle the programming. Connor does most of the sound design.
Yeah, well, I mean, the sound design in all 3 games, so we'll talk about those, or the 3 games I've played. I think you have 4 games total, but the 3 games that I've played, really high quality sound design. I mean, you really do feel in the space that you are operating in. So, let's briefly, and maybe chronological order, just give people, the path for you. Let's talk about the 4 games that you released. Just tell people a little bit about, what those games are about. And I'll probably chime in there because I've played some of those.
Sweet, yeah. So, I mean, the first game that we actually released, I believe, was Sounds of Eden, was it not? Am I wrong, Harry?
I think you're wrong. We did Audio Pong first.
Oh, Audio Pong was first. Was it right? Okay, so yeah, I think a lot of the games that we released, yeah. So Audio Pong was it was a great bit of fun developing that, and again, I think there's a lot to do with kind of like the learning process, not just learning how to practically make, but rather learning kind of design direction and understanding more about mechanic exploration in an audio only game. So that as an inception was a really good way to kind of to see what we could do within the game world, specifically mechanics, and see how we could kind of expand on things that already existed, and to try and kind of translate. But we very quickly kind of got out of that mantra because we both are original creators of music and things and all that stuff. So we really wanted to start, okay, well, let's make something from, instead of trying to translate something that was initially for fully sighted players, let's start making, fully bespoke audio games designed from the ground up to be audio games and stemming from audio game design. So Audio Pong was great.
Yeah, and I was going to say, just before you move on from Audio Pong, just so people know what that is, it's basically a table tennis game that you're playing with really kind of different locations with different ambient sounds in the background, voice acted opponents, who are, taunting you as you're playing. The sound, you kind of, as the sound comes faster and higher pitch, it kind of signals that the ball is coming towards you, where you got to get your paddle, in the proper position to hit it back. As it kind of gets slower and lower, it's moving away from you. So that's kind of, the game. It's a table tennis game, a little bit of a confined space, but probably a good place to start. Don't overwhelm yourself as you're learning how to code and put audio design in. But that's kind of what the game is itself.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, very good.
And just to sort of iterate on Connor's point about learning, that was other than the Kickstarter demo for Pitch Black, A Dusklight Story, that was our first release. So it's things that you don't necessarily think about, because one, you're learning to actually make a game, but 2, you're learning how to upload it to the App Store, how to make all your icons, how to promote it.
Right.
And there's all this sort of behind the scenes stuff, but beyond just the raw game design creation, that we wanted to essentially practice with before we say, right, this is our statement of what we think an audio game should be, which is what A Dusklight Story is. Yeah.
All right, so the next release sounds like Sounds of Eden.
Yeah, exactly. So this was sort of my baby. I initially, the idea was that you have a you have a garden, except in the garden, all the plants are different sounds. So different types of plants make different sounds. And if your garden is growing well, then they're very harmonious and consonant. And if they're growing poorly, or there's lots of weeds around, for instance, then they're very dissonant. And the idea is eventually you'd have this flourishing garden. It would make like a, like a major C or something. And it was also interesting from a design perspective, because that's sort of a strategy audio game. Now, as that development went on, we're very keen on not having too much directly read out to the listener. So if in Sounds of Eden, if you want to know what your point score was going to be, it was going to have to be somebody saying you're on 10 points, you're on 11 points, you're on 12 points, or it was going to become very vague, and you'd have to have really good sort of musical ears, which I don't even have, let alone most of our players, to see how are you doing. So instead, it's like, okay, we've got all this sound design, and it all sounds lovely, but I'm not sure there's a very direct way to turn this into the initial strategy game. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe it can become meditative, because a lot of the sounds are sort of quite simple and quite sort of sine wavy and tonal. And as you wander around, it would be interesting to kind of procedurally place these different types of sounds, so you can just explore and find an area that you like the sound of, and they change gradually over time. And that's what Sounds of Eden became in the end.
And then I imagine it's a detective's demise would be next, right?
Yeah, so ADD was a great project. We had a lot of fun.
But that takes a leap. I mean, from the things that you're, audio pong, very confined. You're at the table, Sound of Eden. It sounds like you're wandering a little bit. I mean, you're really opening things up quite a bit, moving to a detective's demise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is where the first sense of, and obviously this is very minimal, and that was kind of the point. It was supposed to be, again, a more kind of first exploration of an idea, but this is where we first start to get into things like narrative and having characters and an explorable space with tiny details here and there that you can interact with. And it was very much about being immersed within a space, figuring out where you are, and trying to kind of examine the area, investigate the area, and really become a person in a space with freedom to move around that. So that was the first form that, as you say, it was a leap from audio pong, for sure.
And the audio feedback, I mean, again, as you said, as you're exploring the place, I mean, you listen to what's underneath your feet. If you can feel yourself walking on cobblestones, that informs you that you're in one spot. Then you hear yourself walk across a grate, which kind of, lets you know where, if you can find the grate again, you can kind of orient yourself in the space, or you walk through a puddle. I mean, there was a lot of, really, really great sound that made you feel like you were actually walking through that space. And, lots of side conversations, overhearing people, going up, getting close to them, and then maybe being able to actually interact or have a conversation with them. I mean, it was really felt like you were walking through, those couple blocks of that city as you were, trying to unravel the mystery of that story.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you raised a very good point. It's as part of audio game design, before we've even touched on mechanics and sort of gameplay direction. It's an audio game. In our opinion, every bit of audio needs to be very highly polished to a AAA standard, because it can be, and so it should be. But also from a more practical perspective, yeah, you're capitalizing on designing a space that's not really there. So you pick up the nuances of life's sound and trying to recreate that. And it's really expanding on all of the subtleties in sound and turning those into mechanics and signposts.
Now, when you were, did you do that one in Unity as well, I assume?
Yeah, so we use Unity for everything we release. In terms of games, the audiobooks, we do in DAWs, Connor uses Ableton, I use Reaper. There's a constant battle in the company as to which is better. I just wanted to say for Detective's Demise as well, we try and have a bit of a sense of humor in our games, and that very much comes through Connor's writing. Little jokes here and there. When you said you walk over the grate and then the detective says great, like little bits of silliness in the game. We really
we very much like to be silly and serious at the same time. I think we like game design is very serious. We think a hell of a lot about game design and the direction and what the player's gonna feel, but we aren't. We're silly people. We need to inject a sense of silliness into our game as well. So I think everyone will hopefully be able to feel that as well.
Now, when you're creating something like a Detective's Demise in Unity, do you basically have the map of the space laid out in Unity, and then do you like, tag this is where a sound will need to occur or sound off? Like how do you kind of structurally create that game? Because you're not having any visuals in the actual game itself, but I imagine there's got to be some sort of way to keep all the things relatively, related to each other. I don't know if that's just kind of an embedded map in Unity that, like I said, you add the sounds to get various locations, or how does that kind of at a high level work?
Yeah, so when we're designing the games, it's essentially a 2D, I guess map's a good word for it. And then you have, even though the games themselves are 3D, we use some height in our binauralization because that's one of the benefits from it. Yeah, it's essentially, if you've got a space that's 100 by 100, and then you've got the player and pressing forward or pushing the virtual joystick forward, and moves that player along that space, or left or right when you rotate. And then for the binauralization, we've tried is more or less every solution out there, and like Google Resonance Audio, Oculus Spatializer, Steam's like VR audio, and eventually we've settled on Dear VR, which I have to say I think is probably the best sounding binauralizer on the market, and they also happen to make a Unity plugin that handles that. So yeah, great question. Not many people ask how it's made. I appreciate that.
So now, what you're about to release, I think you said August 11th will be the posting out to the App Store for people to download, is your new game, which is A Dusklight Stories, which I would say is a natural successor to A Detective's Demise. It's kind of a similar sort of open world 3D space narrative story, solve the mystery, kind of a lot of tidbits given out at the beginning of the story, but you don't really quite know what's going on, and you're trying to unravel it. So why don't we talk about the evolution of that new game that you have coming out, and just all the things that went into creating that game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I guess as far as a natural evolution from ADD, we thought a lot more about the kind of mechanic design, space design, characters, and of course the story. We kind of recognized from ADD that the mechanics they felt almost a little bit kind of scripted, or at least prescriptive, and we wanted to give players a little bit more opportunity, option, and freedom in mechanics. So that was a big one. ADD was great, but it was very much a sort of like, go here, listen to the thing. We wanted to expand on that and give players a lot more options. So yeah, I mean, that's the main one, and kind of messing with space a lot more, and giving kind of, you can get a lot of character from sound, right? This is where it's all coming from. So you have a space and a street in ADD, and that's nice, but the character and the tone of that space was pretty consistent throughout the gameplay. But the power of kind of having those spatial dynamics is the wrong word, but space, environment variation, going from a nice kind of subtle wind bit in a desert to a more sort of heavier industrial space. Those kind of cinematic, immersive moments are certainly what I focused on a lot more, and just really bringing kind of richness and variation to the world. But Harry would love to talk about some more stuff there.
Sure. I should say this is sort of A Dusklight Story is where we were always aiming at. That we did a Kickstarter almost 3 years ago, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
almost 3 years ago. And that was for this game. So the ones in between have been us learning our craft, gradually getting towards this final product, and that's true of the length of the game. This is the longest thing we've made. It's got the most voice acting. It's got the greatest number of mechanics. From a technical perspective, it's the most complex. It's the first one with a save system. There's all these areas which we've grown as game developers in and tried to put into this one. And obviously we'll continue to grow as the episodes go. But I feel like this is the thing that we imagined when we started the company, and started releasing audio games. So it's really exciting to have it so close to being out now.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing to point out. So it's going to be episodic. So the first episode dropping on August 11th. Again, Connor, I have really enjoyed the world that you're creating. It's kind of like a 1984 dystopian type of scene. Why don't you give people a little bit about, what is this world that you're, of Dusklight?
Absolutely. So it's without going into it, because I have documents on documents and documents of lore that's changed over time, and it's very important to consider kind of the wider stuff that often the player's not even going to get to experience firsthand. But the world of Dusklight, we're in a post-apocalyptic world. Dusklight is the last remaining capital city of at least the immediate world and what people know of. Without giving too much away, a cataclysmic event caused this apocalypse, and now we have Dusklight being controlled by a tyrannical church and corporations, and the power relationship between those is very important to the entire story. But you are joining a sort of quirky, questionable, and not necessarily effective rebel group. And you are also a quirky, questionable, and not very effective agent. So we have a lot of conflict, a lot of silliness, a lot of quirkiness, and that's what we try to inject to the narrative and the world feel.
Yeah, the protagonist has joined this rebel group, but you could tell that he has some completely different objective from them, and he's just kind of going along until he gets what he's really looking for, but we don't even quite know what that is yet.
Absolutely. I think enigma and mystery is kind of the foundation to the narrative direction. But as far as individual narrative kind of interactions or character interactions and character constructions, conflict is everywhere. We wanted that sense of conflict and certainly a sense of unease, which is kind of inherent to audio games in the process of figuring out where you are. Well, our form of audio games, where you're figuring out where you are. So to accompany that, we wanted to have a kind of a hostile, conflict-ridden world for you to nervously navigate your way through.
And speaking of your crowdfunding for this game, I was listening to the credits, and where you announced people who backed you through your crowdfunding. I mean, you had some interesting people there. You had Jesse Anderson from Illegally Cited, you had Brandon Cole, you had Liam Irvin, you had some other game developers like Joe Quirk, who did Circus Master's Revenge. So quite a pedigree of people who kind of backed this game for you.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing to get that support. As I say, when we did the Kickstarter, other than the demo, we didn't have a track record, so it's great that people backed us. This game is long overdue, and apologize for delaying that. I appreciate some of the Kickstarter backers have found that frustrating, and I would too. But yeah, we'd just like to thank people for sort of sticking by us, and really hope that this is sort of what they were hoping for. We feel like it's a great experience, and there's a lot more to come in the future episodes too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I don't think any game player can appreciate is the effort and the amount of that goes into creating a game. I mean, that's probably the simplest of mechanics probably just take loads and loads of hours to get into a game. So it's a lot to put forth.
Absolutely, yeah. There's the mechanic creation, but from Harry's sort of programming perspective, but then there's also mechanic design and direction and iteration and sort of changes and edits, and that's just the mechanics, let alone like inevitable story changes. And yeah, these things take time, and as you say, it's difficult to get an insight into that kind of gameplay timeline, so we understand the frustrations.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, Harry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's also, whilst we had initial ideas of the design, initially there wasn't going to be a protagonist, there wasn't going to be any combat, there wasn't going to be any stealth, and then through feedback from the other things we've released, the game design has changed a huge amount, and then introducing a protagonist means also the script changes, and then you have to re-record all the voice acting, and you're sort of discovering what the game wants to be as you're making it. It's not so much like a established genre where you're refining ideas that have been around for decades. This is, well, we feel like it's quite a new thing, and so we're also figuring out what it's going to be as it's being made.
Well, the nice thing, again, you're so far from what I could tell, you're building a very rich world, and with Dusklight Stories, I feel like you could continually tell other stories within this space. Not only the protagonist that we're learning about right now, but once that story is complete, you can still use the lore of of Dusklight to tell other stories as well.
Oh, absolutely. We have like a whole host of kind of potential offshoots. We have audiobooks, or two audiobooks that were released ages ago, which in hindsight, we needed the world to be a bit more kind of established and known, and a few games to be released before releasing those. But the lore side of stuff is extensive, and we have plans to reveal both information about the world and information about the character in not simultaneously. So this is kind of I don't want to give too much, but this is kind of a really interesting thing that we thought of. We want the players to experience the character and the world to different degrees. And let's just say that they kind of have a bit of control over that. So
when August 12th is occurred, the game's out for a day. I mean, what are how are you going to view success for this game? Is it going to be number of downloads? Is it going to be feedback? Is it, how, there's kind of, sales are great, but that's not always what people measure, as success of whatever they're putting out, particularly when it's, an art form, which this is.
Great question. I mean, from a practical perspective, we are worried about the number of downloads. We want that to be high, not from neither Connor or I particularly care about getting wealthy, but it just means that you can put, if we were able to develop this full time, then we could get games out quicker. We could, we think the quality of this is pretty high, but if you have more time, everything gets easier, and that would be wonderful. So that would be great to get a large number of downloads. I really hope the Kickstarter backers enjoy it. That's a big thing for me. They supported us right at the start, and I would like them to feel like it was worth the wait. That would be great. And from a creative perspective, I think we're both already pretty proud of it. This is probably the biggest project either of us has ever worked on. It's certainly the most complex from a technical perspective for me. Connor, what about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to getting and what I'd regard as success is getting enough feedback and insight into how we inform the next one. We really want to hear everybody's thoughts, and unlike the big boy devs, we really want to hear everybody's thoughts, and we really want to feed as much of that back into the game and just get cracking with the second. But as Harry points out, that does require time, that does require downloads and funding, and so of course that success is kind of predicated on that, really.
Well, with 1 month out, about a month until it's released, is it fully locked and loaded, or are you still making tweaks up and, to the day before? How's that process work?
Um, as with any creative project, it I don't think it ever feels like it's 100% done, but there's a point where you just can't listen to it ever again. So you get a couple of weeks out of that. I mean, the build that you've played, I'd be quite content to release. I feel like that's high enough standard. There are a couple of small changes we may or may not make. I'm currently having a couple of weeks off from listening to it, so I can get a bit of distance just to see what the final tweaks may or may not be. But yeah, we could release it tomorrow and on iOS, and I'd be quite content with that. Connor, how do you feel? Oh, muted.
Technical difficulties. Yeah, no, I feel, how do I feel? I feel really strong. I think, Harry's been sort of, whenever we work, so we finish our sort of full-time jobs, and then sort of every other day we, Harry will come around mine and we work at the table, and I've, sort of the game is now in Harry's hands entirely. I have no responsibility. I'm joking. But yeah, so Harry's always tweaking away, and there are always kind of little things that we can. It's really subjective. It's really hard, as is the case with any art. It's sort of like, when is something finished? Harry's completely right. I think it sounds really great. I think from a polish standpoint, Harry's done an amazing job of making sure that everything plays right, feels right, and those immersive levels aren't broken through kind of technical fall downs. And so yeah, I'm super happy with it. We're just doing some marketing stuff now. We're actually running a campaign to try and get audio games as a subcategory on the App Store, which is obviously really important and beneficial for everybody. So we're focusing on that at the moment.
Great. Well, guys, thank you very much for taking time telling us about all the games that you've done, but particularly this one that's coming out. Again, Dusklight Story is coming out on August 11th. I've played it. It's quite enjoyable. Really sucks you into this world, and I'm excited to see episodes 2 through 6 or however many that you end up doing, because I'm really enjoying the story so far. I always like to just close the interview with just anything that you want to tell the community about your game or accessibility or the state of accessibility, just any kind of final thoughts that you might have or want to share. And I'll give both of you a chance, both Harry and Connor.
Okay. Yeah, just to reiterate what Connor said about the campaign, the sort of, the goal of Purple Gem is to make the best audio games ever and make them established as a genre that everyone knows about, that there are many developers creating in sort of that space, to have audio game subgenres, because of course there can be audio game subgenres. Our type of audio game is definitely not the only type of audio game that can be made, and there are lots of great experiences you can make within the broad category of audio games. So and I think a big step to get there is getting a subcategory in the games category on the iOS App Store. And then a little bit further down the line is doing the same on like PC distribution stores, so Steam or others, and then likewise on the Google Play Store. And so in that vein, as Connor said, we're currently running a petition. We've got a number of UK charities who are sort of backing it and sharing it around for us, and we're hoping to get the same sort of pickup in the US.
Is there a link that you could share that I can share in the description of this for people to sign on the petition?
Absolutely. So it's change.org/audio-games. And I'll email you that link as well, Aaron. So that would be my sort of closing statement.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with Harry. I think it's really, really, really important to kind of push audio games. We are huge advocates for the form of gaming, not just our game. It benefits everybody, giving people more means of entertainment, especially the visually impaired community, who Harry touched on with the original Kickstarters, and yourself, Aaron, touched on with who we had backing us, and who I actually had an interview with Liam the other day, and we're really grateful for the VI community, because I mean, you guys have propelled this into what it is. So we can't thank you enough. But yeah, we just really want everybody to enjoy it, and we need everybody to kind of spread it as much as they can and share it as much as they can. And we're doing sort of proper marketing for the first time, and yeah, it's going well. We're excited to give it to everybody. So.
All right, great. So again, everybody, it's Dusklight Stories. It's August 11th out on the App Store. Again, I will have in the description of this interview all the kind of the social media links for the group, so you can be up to date on any new content or new information coming out from their games. And again, we're very excited. I've gotten to play this game. It's loads of fun. I think everybody will enjoy the world that's being created. Very smooth mechanics. So I really, recommend it as a game for everyone to check out. So again, the best of luck to you guys. Would love to hear back from you. Maybe after it's released, of how it's been going, and maybe some of the thoughts about what's going to be in episode 2.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aaron. Thanks for your time as well. Thanks for interviewing us. Thanks for playing the game. Really, really pleased to hear you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Likewise.
And thank you, Connor. Thank you both for coming out. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.